You would be hard-pressed to find a season of television more divisive than Sherlock Season 4. For some, the 3 episodes were greatly enjoyable, while for many others, they feel the show has fallen from grace, and there are many out there who would agree with the statement that BBC Sherlock is dead. In this video essay, I ask, why? Well, to answer that question, let's be a little scientific. In Season 2, Episode 2, the showrunners adapt the famous Hound of the Baskerville storyline with a great degree of creative liberty. However, many agree that this episode, the Hounds of Baskerville, is one of the show's best. In this episode, Sherlock is solving a decade-old mystery and trying to take down a murderer. On the other side of the argument is Episode 2 of Season 4, The Lying Detective. In this episode, Sherlock is trying to solve a mystery and take down a serial killer. On the surface, they seem like quite similar stories, however, the Baskervilles had a far warmer reception than the latter, and the reason is all to do with execution. Now, there are several reasons why the Baskervilles had a warmer reception than The Lying Detective. However, where a great number of people took issue with the Hounds of the Baskerville was one particular scene where John is locked up in a lab with drugs in his system, with a mutant dog, for it to be later revealed that there was no dog and Sherlock was in fact just using John as a lab rat. The reason many took issue with this scene is because we were not shown the thought process of Sherlock until after the event. It is irritating for the viewer, as the show is supposed to be a detective story, and if we do not fully and totally understand the detective's thoughts, it feels cheap and disengaging for the viewer. Now, that scene is irritating. However, it does not, like some critics have suggested, break the episode. Despite that writing blunder, that one episode, The Hounds of Baskerville, is still a good detective story, because that one moment is the only moment in the whole episode we don't understand Sherlock's thoughts, and for the rest of the whole episode, we, the audience, and Sherlock are all on the same page. For example, when the twist is revealed that the Hound was not a hound at all, but rather just a man, we realise that truth at the same moment Sherlock does. We are informed of Sherlock's theory that the sugar is laced with a drug, and when Sherlock realises his theory is wrong, we realise that alongside him. In short, the reason the climax of not just the Baskervilles but most of the early seasons was compelling was because if something was a surprise to the audience, it was also a surprise to Sherlock, which is a very basic rule when it comes to writing detective fiction. However, that is not the case with Season 4, as in that respect, the episode's climax falls flat on its face. The second episode does a reasonably good job for the most part of showing the thought process of Sherlock. For example, he realises at one point that the client never actually existed and that he had just hallucinated her coming to his flat. Now, that's a fun twist. However, when it comes to the climax, or more specifically, in the way in which Sherlock beats the main villain, the twist is far less enjoyable. It plays out very much like this. Culverton, the villain, sneaks into Sherlock's hospital room and tries to kill him. While trying to kill him, he confesses to being a murderer.
Dead people look like things. I like to make people into things.
Then John and a policeman burst in and stop Culverton in the act. Culverton says they have no proof of anything, as it is just Sherlock's word against his, and it's at this point Sherlock reveals that there is a hidden recording device in John's walking stick, and using that recording, he exposes the villain for who he is and gets him arrested. Now, there is one fundamental problem with that ending. And it is a similar problem to when we didn't know that Sherlock was testing a drug on John, except this example is far worse. The recording device Sherlock used to take down the main villain and resolve the whole plot was entirely unforeshadowed. There was no clue or hint or out-of-place dialogue that piqued the viewer's attention. This reveal of the existence of a recording device was a total surprise to the viewer. This right here is not just poor detective storytelling, this is, quite arguably, fully fledged Deus Ex Machina. And you can be sure that if there is one genre where Deus Ex Machina is least welcome, that is in a detective story where the learning process and reveal of information is far more integral to the viewing experience than it is to any other genre. The entire resolution resolves around this Deus Ex Machina, which outside of an over-the-top comedy like Monty Python's Holy Grail, always makes for a weak and uncompelling ending. What really makes this an unforgivable use of the trope is that it would have been a very simple fix. What they could have done was have it so at one point Watson catches Sherlock fiddling with his walking stick, and then Watson asks him what he is doing, and Sherlock gets flustered and changes the subject. This would raise the viewer's suspicions as to what Sherlock was doing with the cane, and later on when they leave for the hospital, Sherlock makes John take his stick, and John asks, "Why am I carrying this?" and Sherlock just gives a vague, undefined answer. Whilst even if they added those moments, it would not have been flawless storytelling, it would have undoubtedly been better storytelling, because when the bug is revealed in John's cane, there is at least an amount of satisfaction as the audience realises the significance of the clues and that Sherlock had a bigger plan all along. But because there is no foreshadowing, this is not a satisfying ending, and this episode is not the only episode in season 4 alone that ends with a reliance on Deus Ex Machina. The first episode also falls into this classic trap. The whole plot for the first episode is as follows. Mary used to be part of a mercenary group, but she got betrayed, and throughout this whole episode there is this constant mystery. Who was the one who betrayed the team? For a while it seems like Lady Smallwood is the culprit, but in the end, who was the villain all along? It was the receptionist. What felt like a move that would come from a farce, an over-the-top comedy that makes fun of the detective genre, where the tropes of the genre are made a mockery of. There is no hint at all that the receptionist was the villain. Before the big reveal, she only had 30 seconds of screen time in the whole episode, and all she does for those 30 seconds is small talk with Sherlock and how she'd like an ice lolly. This is poor storytelling, and whilst it does not fit the technical definition of Deus Ex Machina, it might as well be just that, because it is equally as compelling. Now, this reliance on Deus Ex Machina is not the only reason many feel the writing quality has slipped. There are many ways in which the show has compromised itself, and one is this. Sherlock has trivialised death. In fiction, death is sacred. When you kill off a character, it can achieve many different things. It can make the viewer burst out into tears or explode into rage. It can be an incredibly effective method at keeping the viewer invested in the series, such as Game of Thrones, where you truly feel no one is safe and anyone could die at any moment, which makes many moments nail-biting. It can be a beautiful way to end a story, as in many ways, death is finality incarnate. There is nothing more final than the end of a life, and when pulled off right, death can be beautiful. Death is an incredibly powerful device that every story inherently has, but if the writers are not careful, it is a device that they can lose. And how has Sherlock lost the device of death? Because it has trivialised it. The second season's ending is all about Sherlock's death and ends with Sherlock committing suicide, except just before the credits, it's revealed that Sherlock didn't die at all. The show spends a great deal of time hinting and flirting with the idea that Moriarty will be resurrected from the grave, and after a huge amount of teasing, the show finally reveals that no, Moriarty truly is dead. And then the show teases some more that actually he might still be alive. In the end of episode 2 of season 4, it ends with a flash of a gun in John's face, heavily implying that John was just killed. But in the next episode, it is revealed that apparently it was just a tranquilizer gun and John is actually fine. The show flirts with death constantly, whilst very rarely actually killing anyone of importance, and because of that, when a lead character is actually killed, such as Mary was, it lands with an underwhelming flop, partially as by that point, death and resurrection has been so over-teased that it has become meaningless. And also a number of people in the audience are having the very justified theory that Mary's death doesn't matter because it's all probably just being faked and she'll come back in the next episode as fit as a fiddle. Death in fiction is sacred. And when you flirt with death routinely, but never actually go through with it and decisively kill someone, death becomes meaningless. Part of the reason many love Game of Thrones is because it is the polar opposite of Sherlock in this respect. Main characters die all the time, and if they are killed, they stay dead. Well, usually. Now, death is only a small part of a show. It is only one small device at a writer's disposal, and to give credit where credit is due, Sherlock Season 4 is in many ways a greatly above average season of television. It has many good moments, the editing is innovative and creative. Sometimes the dialogue has ice-cold wit and is of outstanding quality. One of my favourite lines is in episode 2 when Culverton shows Sherlock his favourite room in the hospital, which just so happens to be the morgue. And later on, when Sherlock is in his hospital, Culverton gives a TV interview and says this.
But I can promise you this, he's going to get the best of care. I might even move him to my favourite room.
Culverton Smith earlier today.
This is fantastic dialogue, and it is an ingenious way of foreshadowing the murderous intentions of Culverton. There are a series of utterly brilliant sequences in episode 2 where Sherlock is deciphering things such as taking the tiniest details from a client's note and figuring out what kind of house the client lives in, or when he realises that Culverton didn't just want to murder one specific person, but rather anyone because he's a serial killer. These sequences throughout Sherlock are a feast for the eyes. However, when Sherlock spends several minutes talking about the angle the sun was at when it hit the note, whilst it makes for a visually interesting scene, what was the purpose of that scene? How does it contribute towards the rest of the story? The answer: it doesn't. The whole sequence where he decides the details from Faith's note is entirely irrelevant to the rest of the story, and whilst this is a visually nice scene, it was entirely unnecessary. It could have been cut and the rest of the episode would not be any worse for it. While the quality of the writing in Season 4 was certainly more inconsistent than it was in earlier seasons, even if the writing were to have been of fantastic quality, if every line of dialogue were to have been crisp and gripping, and every bit of Deus Ex Machina were to be corrected, the show would still be received with a great deal of criticism, and that is for one single reason. And to realise that reason, we're going to go back to the beginning of this essay and compare the Baskervilles to the Lying Detective one more time, as there is one thing the Lying Detective does that makes it the inferior Sherlock story. Because the main antagonist of this episode is not Culverton, the serial killer, it is Sherlock. The internal flaws of Sherlock are so prominent, take so much focus of the show that they become the centre of the whole episode. Baskervilles is an episode about the case as Sherlock solves it. The focus is on the mystery as the clues unwind, but the Lying Detective is all about Sherlock as he struggles to maintain his sanity, whilst he also just so happens to be trying to solve a case. The thing is, neither approach is necessarily bad. There is no reason you cannot have a great detective story where the focus is on the detective as he is losing his mind while solving a case. The problem is, while that is a good premise for a detective story, it is not a good premise for a Sherlock story, as that is not what the show had been up to that point. The critical reason Season 4 was so divisive was because it went in an entirely new direction. It took the focus away from the case and onto the characters, and while for some it still made for an enjoyable story, for others they couldn't help but feel alienated, as to a degree they were watching an entirely different show, and naturally, if you change what your show is fundamentally about halfway through, many people who have been loyal viewers up to that point will lose interest. And there is no episode of Season 4 that is a more perfect proof of this idea than episode 3, The Final Problem. This episode, whilst enjoyed by some, was panned by many others for one simple reason. Every episode up to that point was to some degree a detective story. There was always a case to be solved, always a mystery to be unravelled, but for The Final Problem, that was not the case. The entire focus of the episode was all about Sherlock, John, Mycroft, and their sister. The whole episode was not about plot, it was all about character. And again, while for some that makes for an enjoyable story, because it is so alien in focus to what the show had been up to that point, it killed the interest of many viewers who had no interest in seeing that kind of story. Sherlock is in a bad state right now. Because of the show's recent lapse in focus, a lot of people have lost interest, but if in next season, fresh writing talent is brought in, and if the focus of the show goes back to its roots, where it is all about the case as Sherlock and John solve it, there is no reason Sherlock can't be resurrected, and with a clean slate and some quality writing, Cumberbatch's Sherlock can become TV's greatest detective once more. Sherlock Holmes is an iconic character. His skills of deduction are the stuff of legend, but what if I were to tell you that there is a place where you can learn how to develop a superhuman level of deductive reasoning, outsmart your enemies, and learn how to catch dangerous criminals with your eyes closed? Well, unfortunately there is no such place, but do not worry, because we can settle for the next best thing. When it comes to investing in yourself and learning how to hone down your craft, whether it be creative writing, filmmaking, graphic design, or 1,000 other things like video editing or how to grow a successful business, there is no website I would recommend more than Skillshare, and I can proudly thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Recently I've been watching a lot of courses, but there is one on the more commercial side of marketing by Doro Katana, and I found it really quite insightful. So if you like writing and one day want to do that as part of your job, I'd recommend that as a great place to get started. I bought a membership a while back for $10 a month, and it's money I can definitely say was well spent. However, the folks at Skillshare have given me a link that's in the description, and if you click that link, you will get 2 months of premium membership for just 99 cents, which, trust me, is an absolute steal. However, let me stress that there are only 699 slots, and they are expected to go quickly, so please be sure to click that link while the offer still stands. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time on The Closer Look.